Continue, Chair.
Okay, well, I think probably then we'll just continue on. Mr. Laxale, we'll give you 15 minutes starting now. Oh, Jerome, you're on mute.
I am too. Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity, and Ms. Cascott-Lee, thank you for your answers to date. I have a few questions on greenwashing, as the Deputy Chair had. You've said that greenwash is one of the ACCC's priorities, and both yourself and previous chairs have said the same, and that greenwashing includes misleading claims concerning net zero and carbon neutrality. Is that still correct?
It is. We do engage with a clean energy regulator, particularly in relation to offset questions, which have methodologically also a lot of complexity.
Okay, so you've been reported in the press as saying that greenwashing and fabrications about carbon neutrality have created unfair advantages for companies and have led to misleading consumers. Do you think that firms actively use claims about being net zero or being carbon neutral to gain a competitive advantage over other?
We are concerned that that is the case. We do know that amongst other consumer enforcers worldwide, so within the ICEPEN group that I referred to previously, that is International Consumer Enforcement Protection Agencies, they have done at a global level research to test this and found 40% of claims had problems and weren't able to be verified. So now that's a high proportion. We are only now, because this has been this financial year priority, we are now commencing investigation and internet sweeps, as I spoke about before, as an initial step, where we can build up a database to be aware of to what extent we think those problems are occurring in Australia. But we are being very prominent about the priority now, because we are asking businesses to take a rigorous and truthful and proactive approach so that their compliance efforts, we give a strong compliance message, but we will be testing, and once we've tested it, we'll be able to give you a more data-based answer to that question. But the research of our colleagues globally says that most likely there is such misleading behaviour taking place, but we need to do the work here in Australia.
Sure, but just in relation, do you believe that misleading, if there were to be some of that misleading behaviour here in Australia, do you see a link to a competitive advantage?
Absolutely.
Of one firm over another?
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay.
I do, and the ACCC does. We see that it undermines the activities of the parties companies that genuinely and legitimately invest in improving their processes, in making them more sustainable, in making a swifter transition towards commitments in terms of transition to net zero. So we see it not only as undermining community and consumer trust, but as undermining the capacity of Australian business to move as the policy commitments oblige towards the targets.
Okay, thank you. Several people, including a former chair of the Emissions Reduction Assurance Committee, have raised some concerns with the integrity of carbon credits. I think the term is often used, low integrity carbon credits, to describe some that are in the system. for the purposes of today, I'll just call them junk carbon credits. How can a consumer know the difference between a carbon neutral product developed with renewable energy over a carbon neutral product that's offset with junk credits?
The first part of your question is, and all of it is important, and one part of it is incredibly relevant from our perspective, which is consumers are unable to actually validate or assess the truth of what is being put to them in this regard. It is one of the reasons that our initial guidance that we are emphasising is that there needs to be very specific, very clear, able to be substantiated and narrow claims made rather than general claims, because it is very difficult for consumers to ever assess the validity of such claims. In terms of the questions of offsets and such products, we do have engagement currently happening with ASIC and the Clean Energy Regulator. So I'll ask Rami to speak about that engagement, because as the rest of your question indicated, this is a very complex set of questions to determine what actually truthfully can be said.
And so the regulatory framework with respect to carbon credit units would be something within the purview of the Clean Energy Regulator. So if there's integrity issues with respect to those units, then they would have responsibility for them. I should also say with ASIC, any claims that are made in the context of investment raising, in the context of prospectuses, then that would fall within ASIC's purview. But more generally, to the extent that there are claims made about by corporations that they are moving towards net zero when that's manifestly not the case, then that would be something that would fall for consideration by the ACCC.
Okay, so you touched on the Clean Energy Regulator. So do you play any role in investigating the integrity and legitimacy of either Australian carbon credits or international carbon credits when firms use them to gain a competitive advantage over another firm?
So to the extent that a legitimately held carbon credit unit is used in a manner to misrepresent its effect or creates an association that's not accurate, then yes, we would our jurisdiction would be enlivened unless it's done in the context of an investment product or service, in which case ASIC would be engaged. So it does depend on the context of how the claim is made or the conduct occurs. But as Ms. Cass-Gottlieb mentioned, we're working very closely with the Clean Energy Regulator and ASIC to ensure that there's sort of regulatory alignment on these issues.
So you said a legitimately held carbon unit, but what about whether or not that carbon unit is legitimate, as in whether it's actually reducing emissions? You've established the link between it being, people who claim to have net zero gain a competitive advantage over others. Would that not, investigating legitimacy of the units themselves? Are you saying that's not in your role?
Well, so if if that relates to the regulatory framework in which that unit exists, then yes, that would be a question for the clean energy regulator to look at, or other, possibly a policy question for government. So we don't have any regulatory function with respect to Australian carbon credit units. However, once there is a unit that has been properly created and is used in a way that is either misleading or deceptive or unconscionable, then it would fall either to the ACCC or, in certain circumstances, ASIC to investigate that conduct.
Okay. Ms. Cass-Gottlieb, you mentioned in a previous answer that a consumer is unable to tell the difference between, those making legitimate claims and those that are perhaps not. Given that we've just seen a population, I guess really we had what's called the climate election, climate change is on top of people's mind. Being able to distinguish the difference, I think, from a consumer's perspective would be top of mind for a lot of people. And you mentioned that this financial year, that this was a area of focus for the ACCC. So when, do you have any timeframes as to when you'll be commencing investigations? You mentioned an internet sweep before, but I mean, how do you see this financial year and next play in terms of that space?
So we have, yes, we have commenced that internet sweep, which will inform guidance that we will give. We also do have some areas of investigations underway, though, because they are still in an investigation phase. Our process is to keep them confidential, but they cover quite a range of sectors. So we are in both an information gathering, data gathering and investigation phase. We will, in the course of this financial year, release guidance in relation to what we expect to see. We, from businesses when they make product claims. We will also, as we proceed with investigations, at the point at which, if we decide that they are appropriate to take proceedings, we will of course announce them, and that will also help build up understanding. But in addition to giving guidance to businesses about what we expect to see in their conduct in terms of being clear, defined, limited in their claims, and always having strong verification material that they can substantiate the claims, we will also be engaging with consumers about what we are seeing, what they can look to, and as we see, quite possibly through policy work with government, where we see standards being promulgated about what can be seen, that will also help us to start to give to consumers bases upon which they can have confidence in the backing behind a claim. So we do see this as work for us, but for work together with policy as well, Mr. Laskal, so that there is, in addition, the building up of standards that customers and consumers can rely upon.
Okay, one final question. Has the ACCC ever found that a company has greenwashed? Have you made a determination?
So the ACCC did take proceedings in relation to flushable wipes. And just that phrase, as you will hear, does convey the ACCC alleged that environmentally and in terms of the system, that it did not just mean that it could be flushed from the user's own toilet, but that it was able to be managed in the sewage system. Unfortunately, the ACCC was not successful in the court proceedings there. However, it is a good example of the sorts of importance in relation to, for instance, a claim that a product is recyclable, or a claim that a product is made of sustainable materials. There is a degree of the importance of the scientific basis, and we are aware that when we take these cases, we will be put to proof in courts about showing where we consider that the claim does not have a sufficient justification. So it is an example, and we do have others we're investigating.
May not have been clear. I meant in regards to, I use the term greenwash. I meant, has the ACCC made a finding against someone for greenwashing, for being claiming to be carbon neutral? Yeah.
Claiming to be carbon neutral, I don't believe so. We did consider that flushable wipe, we alleged it was greenwashing actually, because we considered that that had the connotation.
Again, not exactly on point, but Volkswagen was probably
Yes,
also
that's
the most significant.
that's very much on point. So the representations there were as to emissions reductions in relation to the Volkswagen vehicles, and that did result in a finding of misleading and deceptive conduct and significant penalties.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Littell.
Thank you.
Mr. Wallahan.